Good morning, everybody.
Hey, Daniel.
Morning.
Hey, Jennifer. Hey, Amanda. Hey, Jen, have you looked at NowPow previously?
I have not. I don't actually have much familiarity. There's a
How
lot.
about-
A lot of these that are more focused towards the social services side that I'm not
Yeah.
as familiar with, and so it's an interesting
Okay.
exercise for me.
Yeah, that's great. I was curious about that.
Yeah.
We'll learn together.
Yes.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
How's everybody this Friday morning?
Great.
Just
Good.
delighted to be here.
Well, hopefully we'll give you some time back in your day. This looks like you've got 75 minutes, and I'm sure we can send along some materials for review as well, and maybe
Sure.
even shorten the call a little bit. Joe is joining right now. And then, of course, if there's some additional information you want from kind of our subject matter experts in privacy and consent, we can.
Is it just me or did we lose Kathy?
No,
We can definitely.
you can. Yeah, I think Daniel is lagging.
Hello?
Daniel, it's you.
Uh-oh.
Can you,
I see you now, and I hear you seem to be back.
Daniel, can you hear us?
yeah. I may go on, I may just take my video off. I don't have a great internet connection.
Yeah, and maybe even phone.
Okay, can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, we heard
Okay.
you the whole time.
Oh, okay. Great.
All right. Joe, are you able to hear us?
Loud and clear. Good morning, everyone.
Great.
Morning.
I'm going to do exactly as Daniel is, stick with my picture. That way, hopefully there won't be any audio issues. Take a little bandwidth off. So,
Sort of unrelated, but kind of interesting. I work at University of Michigan, and there was a study through the university that said that if you take your video off on Zoom calls, you lessen your carbon footprint. So
there
it was
you
very
go.
insignificant, but it was still like, you're using less energy overall when you do
Well,
that.
considering I was reading an article early this morning around electric cars from the New York Times. Did you see that? Specifically
Yes.
because of what Biden's talking about trying to achieve.
Mhm.
And then you think about, my husband used to work in the energy world, and I'm like, I remember him, it's all about optimizing all of that, or we're going to have brownouts everywhere. So there's a lot to figure out there, Jennifer, for sure. And Kathy, nice to see you again. I'm sure we will see each other again in a couple of weeks.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
So I think, Amanda, you set up the meeting. Do we want to start with introductions all around? And then maybe, I know a little bit, Daniel, about your organization, mostly because of the HIMSS SDOH task force, but
Right.
we'd love to kind of maybe if you can set the stage, if you want, if you will, and then
Sure.
we can dive into a little bit from the NowPow end and take it in the direction of addressing some of those questions you sent along.
Sure. It's strange looking at my picture talking, only seeing Joe and Jennifer here live. Yeah, so let me just give a little brief overview. Joe, I'm one of the co-founders of Stewards of Change and have been doing sort of inter-system data exchange and efforts around information sharing for a bunch of years between social services and education and justice and healthcare. So I've been on this path for a while. And as Kathy said, I've been participating in some of the HIMSS work and got to know her there. I think it was actually before HIMSS I met you, but can't remember exactly where, but might have been in one of the San Diego events years ago. Anyway, one of the things, just to cut to the chase, so to speak, is we have been very focused over the last year on identifying sort of big things that might have a structural impact on the HHS system altogether, safety net. From a bunch of work we had done with a national group during COVID, or COVID one, I might say. And one of the things that came out of that was this concept of how do you expedite or improve the consent process so that people, wherever they are, could actually provide their consent on an informed, responsible, secure basis, but also provide it in a way that would facilitate data sharing. And again, not only within the healthcare HIPAA world, but also more importantly, from our perspective, from education, from probation, housing, a variety of other social non-healthcare, as well as healthcare, of course. And so we've been on that pursuit. And so we have been working hard the last month and a half, 2 months on trying to do that under a small grant from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to put together a scan that identifies sort of what are the emerging practices around consent that are out there, from which we want to build a proof of concept and implement it in a couple of the integrated care for kids sites. And so we're sort of talking with people who are involved with that work, either directly or indirectly, and thought that obviously your work at NowPow would make a lot of sense to hear what you're doing, given your close connection to a lot of the community-based organizations and how you're handling that, both from a legal perspective and an operational perspective and a technical basis. And so we get a good sense of, we can actually share that information within the scan report itself, so that we can sort of have a picture of what's going on. Because I don't think there's we haven't found any particular picture of what the consent universe is right now. There's lots of different pieces of it and different organizations and people doing different parts of it, but there's no sort of overview of what's happening there. So that's the purpose of today's call. We've been interviewing a bunch of different people, trying to really be able to depict what you're doing and how it fits, and what unique challenges you've been able to address, and how you guys think about these issues. So that's probably a longer introduction, but I wanted to give you a little context there. And Adam is the primary investigator and writer on this. So Adam, why don't you go, and we can all probably do a real quick introduction and
Yeah, sure.
before that.
So I work with Daniel on most of the projects of Stewards of Change. My background is as a journalist. I was a reporter and editor for the Boston Globe for over 20 years. Then I am an SME in the world of child welfare. I've headed a think tank in that realm for over a dozen years. And now I bring those two pieces of background to consulting. And this is one of the projects I'm working on.
Kathy, I think
who
folks
else?
know.
Yeah. Who else needs to say hi?
I think it wouldn't hurt for everyone just to say hello.
Okay, I'll just jump in. So I'm Jennifer Bernstein. I work at the Network for Public Health Law. And in my role, I do a lot of work around assisting public health departments with data sharing. And that includes looking cross-sector. So a lot of work sharing with health systems, but also with criminal justice and law enforcement, social services, and really just education, very broad spectrum, mainly for public health purposes. But we assist looking at larger issues. So we look, at the laws surrounding all of those areas, issues of consent, and so on. And so I've been working now with Stewards of Change on several projects over the years, and it's been a lot of learning on my part, and enjoyable.
And teaching on your part. Thank you.
Yes, I try.
Brian, you
Kathy,
want to win?
Kathy or Brian?
I think everybody knows me, but
Okay.
if you don't,
Great.
I'm Kathy Miller, Chief Operating Officer for the Bronx Trio.
And I'm Brian Hanspicker. I'm technical lead for Project Unify. Well, really just one of many technical leads, but somebody has to wear the hat with the bullseye on it. I'm also co-chair of the Consent Technology Working Group within Unify and the Consent Governance Working Group. I'm on the Gravity Project TAC and a number of the working groups for TAC, as well as a bunch of other standards bodies in the healthcare and human services realm. And full disclosure, I work as a consultant through my own company, Practical Markets, and through Stewards of Change Institute. But I also, as part of that, I happen to be a part-time CFO for Open City Labs, which is working in the same space as NowPow and others. Joe?
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Joe Hinderstein. I'm a senior account executive here at NowPow on our sales and business partnerships team, and been at the company for about 1.5 years. And my background sort of spans from global health roles in Uganda to EMR implementations, health economics and outcomes research. And yeah, really pleased to be here and chatting about consent today. And then Kathy, I think over to you.
Okay, I'm the last one. I'm Kathy Crookston. As Daniel said, we've met many times already, and Kathy Miller and I have as well, especially as we think about any of the work in New York City, and specifically even around the Inc. grantees. I've been in healthcare my entire professional life. In fact, after graduation from Purdue in nursing, I was in New York City for 10 years as a nurse at New York Hospital. So one of our current customers and was my customer in my previous role. So I split my professional career pretty much down the middle. Half of that time, I was a nurse provider, either clinically in acute care settings or administratively in acute care settings. My husband used to say where people came and went very quickly. And so not thinking about really some of those outside the walls of the hospital like we really need to. And as Daniel said, it's all of these community assets and how can that improve somebody's health and well-being. So 16 years ago, I worked for a company, a startup in the world of patient engagement, and everybody on this call would say better engaged patients or better engaged people in their care. And it would also, I would say, go with education, as I was on a school, very involved in schools that my kids were in and various committees and boards will benefit them. So getting people engaged in their health, and we proved out that that improved outcomes. So I worked for a company called ME Solutions. Some of you might be very familiar with that. It was purchased by Welch's Kluwer, great big company, clinical decision support. And then about 2.5 years ago, came over to NowPow. Love that whole concept of really bringing community care alongside healthcare. So totally understanding that reducing some of these barriers to access, equity, really making sure that we can stand up people in their health and well-being. But of course, I'm going to say right out of the gates, I don't have the same experience that some of you have in education, justice, et cetera. I've learned a lot along the way. Primarily, you would know that a lot of our anchor customers, or those that we have been meeting with, are in the payer, the provider, but we also have those in education and justice, and that are really coming to us, or community coalitions that are coming to us first. So it's really an interesting space. So we're excited to be here, and hopefully can address some of your questions. I have a couple of questions before we even get started, though, kind of out of the gate based on what you said. And Adam, love that you have all of this expertise in child welfare. We work very closely with Chapin Hall. You're probably very familiar with all the folks at Chapin Hall. Since we were kind of both born out of University of Chicago, we've worked with others as well, but oftentimes as both somewhat policy experts in the child welfare space, implementation or evaluation, it's great to work alongside them in various projects. We have one going in DC right now, and we have a couple of others too across the nation, but that's one that comes to mind. So,
that's great.
And then when you mentioned, and I know some of this connection was with Kathy through what we're doing with the Inc. grant, before we get started, I guess I have two questions. One, it sounds like you have a grant to actually build something around consent. Yet obviously, each of you, including you, Brian, if you have a company that is doing some similar work as NowPow, there are referral platforms like us, all worthy competitors that we meet with all the time and, work in some of the same geographies that are also solving around consent. So is what you're thinking about building with RWJ to improve upon what somebody is doing or try to replace it for across all platforms? Any feedback or thoughts, or how are you thinking about that?
I can
Since you asked me, I guess we're not this grant is, and the work that we're doing, these interviews that we're doing, is not with the intention of building a replacement for. It is to do a survey of what already exists out there. What are people working with for the purposes of, at least within Project Unify, being able to write some implementers agreements, some blueprints that say, if you want to be able to exchange information, for instance, between healthcare and human services, based on the various standards that are in development, for instance, within the Gravity Project for referrals, you need to have consent. And here are some standards for consent and some open source software for consent that could be used for dealing with the multi-domain consent problem.
Great, thanks. That's helpful. And then specifically when you talked a little bit about that some of this was even to be very supportive of the Inc. grantees, were the first interviews with the 8 grantees to kind of find out, how are they thinking about that and how you're going to be supporting them? Because of course, we're working with half of them and, it's kind of now everybody's got to kind of jumpstart that work, right? First it was the readiness and preparing and determining all the tools and the people and what they were going to be doing. And then now it's kind of really getting started. So was that kind of the interview process, first kind of speaking with them, all of them, and then speaking with everybody kind of in the NowPow world, if you will, of how we're all thinking about it?
So let me jump in for a sec. We have some things are being conflated, and there's no reason at all you should know that. We have a few different projects that are consent related. We have separate work with. We have work with the sites you're working. Well, with some of the sites you're working with, we're working with New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey. That's separate from, but related to this, the project for which we are interviewing you. This project, which is funded by RWJF, but the other work is not. This project is strictly a scan of what's out there. Who's doing what? What are the initiatives we should know about and that other people in the field should know about and that left hands and right hands should know about? You may know about some or all of them or not. And other people we know from interviews don't know about all the projects that are consent related that are out there. So this is an aggregation of a look at what's out there so we can learn from it and so we can teach from it. And so this is a separate project. So in working with the Inc. sites is a different piece of work, though it will be informed by this project. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. No,
And just to clarify, those two efforts are in parallel with, but semi-decoupled from the work that we're doing within Project Unify as a voluntary industry collaborative to define these blueprints or interoperability implementers agreements for dealing with consent. So we've got multiple independent, semi-independent moving parts.
Okay.
Yeah, and they're related, but they're not the same. Just real quick. So Amanda, who I don't think introduced herself as a colleague of ours, who is also integral to this project and is working hand in hand with me on it. Amanda will send you a link and get you permission to get into our SharePoint site, where there's a working document that will very clearly, I think, show you what we're up to, what we're looking at, what projects we're examining, what issues we want to address in a report that will grow out of this project. And we'd love for you and your colleagues to take a look at that. You should absolutely feel free to input content, to ask questions, to make suggestions, and I think that'll be helpful to you.
Adam, that is really great, because as I said, Mike and Leslie were not able to join, and they recently, and any and all of you could have even joined that webinar. I think there were 1,000 people on it, to be honest, but ONC had a webinar around both interoperability. Jennifer, in your head, the rest of us have our pictures up, but everybody might have been on it. So it wasn't the one that was kind of the work group, but it was a previous one, and it was a lot about privacy and consent as well. So they may want to make some comments or review and add some additional material for sure. So that's great.
Yeah, and you should take me up on that offer, please, especially as it relates to NowPow. You will see in the document that each of the initiatives that we're addressing, that we're identifying, will get an explanation, obviously, of what is it. And if you can fill in some blanks there to ensure that, this is not like reporting for a newspaper where you're not allowed to have input. We want you to have input. We want to get it right. We want to describe it to the world accurately, and so that people can learn from it. I mean, that's the point. So please feel free to, you'll see NowPow in the list of initiatives, and with just one paragraph so far of explanation, we'll fill that in from this interview and other research. But you should absolutely feel free to fill in those blanks to the extent you have the time to do it.
And with regard to the ONC, many of us on Project Unify were in the audience for both of the ONC workshops, and the ONC has folks that have been participating directly and indirectly with the work of Project Unify. So we're definitely not marching to a different drummer than the ONC.
That's great. And I think Daniel will back me up. I think even on our HIMSS SDOH task force, we're trying to make sure that the really good work that is going on, say at Gravity or at ONC or something, that one, we could amplify it, or your work, versus the fact that sometimes these things could be doing the same work elsewhere, and then it's not collaborative, but it's almost, I don't want to say even in conflict, but duplicative. And it should build on good work, right? So that's terrific. And thanks, Amanda. It looks like you already shared it via email. You're on top of this. Terrific. So I think, if you've ever been on any presentation, NowPow, we always come prepared with like an entire slide deck. Not that we need that always here. Sometimes it's more of a discussion. I think, Joe, if you want, you could pull up, does everybody feel like you already know background on NowPow and everything about NowPow to kind of set the stage? Or do you want us to roll through 5 minutes of like, remind me a little bit about how you came about? And sometimes that's also a perspective that makes sure that you know how we think about anything that we do from a building perspective on. Would that be helpful?
What would be very helpful is if you fill in blanks that are not obvious from looking at your website, your materials. And I'm going to throw out a few things. What is NowPow intended to accomplish? What domains we call domains? Child welfare, education, healthcare, etc. Social determinant stuff. What domains do you touch? How do people use it? How do people use NowPow? What technologies or privacy laws do you address? Stuff that might not be very apparent from just looking at your website that we can the information that we can get elsewhere. If you
And
could go at it that way.
How do you address interoperability with other systems, which is really where these consent questions come into play? Because if you're doing something simply within a single system, the local system can handle the consent without worrying about whether or not we have some standard mechanisms or standard specifications. But when you talk about interoperating with independent student information systems or CWIS child welfare systems or healthcare EHRs, that's when the question of what independent consent services comes into play.
Okay, is that enough questions to get you started?
A lot of questions. So, Joe, I don't know that you have kind of the data flow slide even. So we may be, and I'm going to apologize, but we may be kind of going all over the place first. And Joe, maybe just skip through a little bit. There's a couple of ones that come to mind based on what Adam asked and what Brian asked. So you could even leave the slides up, Joe, and I'll just kind of see if we're walking through them a little bit. Oh, can you go all the way back a little bit?
Sorry, let me know what you're thinking, and I can also pull up the data flow separately as well.
Yeah, so go to the very beginning and let me just, yeah, okay. So everybody probably already knows how we got started, but let me just kind of remind you how we got started. So Dr. Linda, our founder, Chief Innovation Officer, recognized in her own practice, she's a clinician, a researcher, and she really recognized the whole concept of being able to treat a person and e-prescribe medication, easily e-prescribe tests, labs, but not community. So she stood up not only NowPow, but a sister company called MapScore, and took that CMMI grant. And I was actually working for Emmy at the time and remember every single one of these. I think 3,000 applicants and something like 26 grantees. She stood that up, and they then had the opportunity to house every digital asset, because the sister company called MapScore, every asset. So what they wanted to kind of find out were what would be the valuable assets based on what they were trying to achieve. So Adam, what you were saying is like how we look at this may be a little bit different. We're looking at like, what are we trying to do? What are we trying to connect people to reduce barriers and improve their life, if you will, overall. For this, they were taking the lens of doing this within healthcare and then connecting to community, 33 sites. But I think what was important here is having it embedded within the workflow. So it was integrated into a variety of different EHRs so that it could be automatically triggered based on data you knew that you were pulling in, demographic people data. What do you know about Kathy Crookston already that you've got within the EHR, and a screening or a health condition, and they created custom conditions for the health conditions to be able to automatically e-prescribe what would be either a single or a list of those assets and share them out. Now, these were not the closed loop even. These were what we would call shared referrals. Shared referrals is a one-way referral. Like if I gave you this referral of something that I found that was really a valuable service that I had used, and it would be very personal, and I knew it was going to be significant for you. It would be something that they may be for a specific population in your language and the hours you need. Everything about that would be personal, not only based on the needs that were identified. And then they had an independent study done to see, and again, what they were looking at here were the outcomes that healthcare typically cares about. So those were those value-based purchasing type of outcomes, reducing ED, higher primary care, which was great. You want somebody to kind of quarterback care, reducing readmissions. But I think significantly they found, and this has been repeated over and over, that about half of these people were actually sharing with somebody, friend or family base. So it is very much that ripple effect, very much a halo effect. So that's kind of where we were born. So everything that we do, and I say this from the lens of trying to think through from both data that'll be valuable to measure impact if we want this to be a sustainable model, and thinking through too some of the things that we are mindful of in healthcare. Again, I've been in healthcare my whole professional life, and I would say being on education boards for my kids, understanding too the privacy and making sure that this will be very patient or people-centered approach around anything that you would be shared around that data. So just those two things, kind of thinking about data flow and what data. Now we know that some of those decisions have not been made. So interoperability, super important. I was on a call yesterday with a group in Colorado that is looking at interoperability, but also trying to understand like what data. So interoperability, maybe that won't be as tough as understanding like, okay, is everybody going to align on what data should be shared and where should it be put? And we alone cannot solve that, right? I think we need both EHR companies. Well, we need direction from what will be decided by organizations like ONC or Gravity groups. And then it needs to be, the larger like EHRs. And then, as you said, on the community side, there's a variety of other systems to know where you're going to pull and push that data from. One thing a little bit different, you see in the middle here where it says basic needs. So when you talked about the domains, there are those basic need domains of food, housing, employment, and transportation that we would agree, and going beyond those basic needs. We are seeing a lot of these interventions that we're doing that are in maternal child health and birth equity, substance use, and making sure that the programs around SUD, behavioral health, I want to highlight those as 3. And of course, due to COVID particular, we think a lot about the idea of even social isolation, and that's not only for the aged, but for so many. Those are just some of those. So when we usually will have a slide up about our interventions, and we are really an intervention-based way of thinking of this. What are you trying to achieve? What kind of intervention? Some people might call it program, but we typically use the word or phrasing of intervention. What are you trying to achieve with that? That helps us understand both the planning, the design, the work for that. And part of that, again, would be data. And then also the types of referrals would indicate what we need to think about as it relates to privacy and consent. Does that make sense so far, just from a setup perspective?
Yes, but I would love to hear a little more specifics about how you get consent and how you exchange information among those various realms: food, employment, transportation. I mean, do you?
Yep. So we'll go into that. So I like to
okay, great.
We kind of set that up because we have 22 service categories and over 200 service types. Joe, you can probably fast forward. Some people talk about just the basic needs and we think of the whole person. This one here, even though you're going to see this, Adam, as kind of a product slide, think of it as the tools, because again, a little bit different. We do not only focus on the top of the pyramid. So very much this is like a population health pyramid. When we're working with any of the organizations we work with, we want them to think of, yes, they have data, I'm sure. They have risk stratification. If they're in healthcare, they have their care management team with a lot of human capital focused on the top of the pyramid. If we're going to improve the health of populations, and we work with a lot of public health, I'll give you 2 examples. New York City and Chicago, 2 of the largest public health in the nation. We want to help them solve for the health of all the citizens, of all the residents of their communities as well. So from a tool perspective, we think of them as tools or licenses. It's really having the right tools along the way and the functionality that will allow for that. I'm going to point out one thing here that we say coordinated network. So we have different ways that we think of these types of referrals, and that will go into how we're going to talk about what might be needed as it relates to consent. So again, think of these as self-serve tools. I can go in, I search myself, I can go ahead and find and use and text or email to myself or my family a service that I think is going to be valuable. We can even use our APIs, and somebody like Health First, who's a large payer, might put that right within their member app. And again, in that case, if I'm a Health First member, I'm just searching on my own for a service that I might want to use within that member app itself. But if we move up, we have a tool called NowRx, and that is anonymous. So again, if some of our organizations, maybe, police officers or first responders, they don't want to house the people information. They just want to help people in their community right on the street. I can use that from my phone, help search for something that might be right in their neighborhood, in an address or across the street, and they say, boy, I could really use this kind of help. And I can give that to them. But again, it's not going to house that people information. So we're making sure that this would be anonymous, yet it will be supportive of what they need.
Give an example, if you would.
Yep, the first responder or police officer. Let's say I'm a police officer who is part of neighborhood community action policing, which if you think about what over the last year, there's a lot of emphasis on trying to be helping within the community to build trust. So that defund police was probably a very bad naming of it. It's more, how do you use your funds in a way that will build trust? And then in the police officers in the community being beneficial and helpful to those in those communities. And what we've been learning from various conversations or where anybody who's using that is that they really do see that oftentimes there might be something like, boy, I could use some help in understanding where employment or job training. I could use some help for food insecurity. But of course, they're not trying to, at this point, actually want to do this anonymously and help somebody in the community. So it's a great way they can do it right from their phone. We saw the same thing even during COVID with first responders, where they wanted to be able to help somebody find shelter or something when they were out, New York City, Chicago, Minneapolis, a variety of different geographies that we serve, where they were using NowRx in that way as well. So not housing the people information, yet being able to have easy access to find the right services for someone.
Great.
Does that kind of make sense?
Yep, makes sense.
So when we think about housing people information, then it comes to kind of that what we call PowerX. Think of that as the more powerful tool. And then we think of use of that in a few different ways of the different types of referrals. Joe, is the next one around the referral? Oh, good. Okay. I think this can be helpful for understanding. So I talked about the 3 different referral types. And again, this is something we feel strongly about, because if you go back to that pyramid, 80%, you think of that 80-20 rule, 80% may be more of that shared one-way referral. Again, one way, I'm giving you the information. You may go ahead and use that information. I'm not giving your information to a service organization. I'm giving it to you that it may be beneficial for you to use it. And I believe that it would be beneficial because of the left side of the screen. Because I know some information about you, and I understand your preferred language or the type of insurance. I understand something maybe about those identified needs based on either a conversation or a screen or assessment questionnaire, whatever we want to kind of pull in data, or we can actually house that data right within the NowPow platform and have a screener that could be used there. But because of that information of both what I know about you and what you've told me, I now can give you very specific, personalized referrals. And you would benefit from those. Now, again, that original research and ongoing research has showed that benefit. So that's great, because this goes to how do you improve the health of the population? Now, the nurse in me would say the tsunami that's coming to all of us is this rising risk. Somebody with prediabetes and maybe, tending toward hypertension. And yet know and have identified now that they have some social determinants of health that are negative, and that they may not even be able to get to an appointment or healthy food. So when you think about that rising risk is super important to be able to get to them. And for that, we have these two types of closed referrals. Closed loop referrals are important. We know that both types of these, now we call it tracked and coordinated, but think of this. A tracked referral is where I have people information. I know Kathy Crookston, I know some information about her. I'm going to be able to take the information that I know and the needs identified, and I can make a closed loop referral, but I'm going to do it a one-way closed loop referral. The information and just the information that needs to be shared would be shared out with the community-based organization in order to make a successful referral. So they then can reach out. Now that information is shared through our secure platform to that organization, and just the information that needs to be made in order to make a successful referral. And that also keeps everybody on the same page, because I can let someone know through the platform, that person, I'm going to use myself, Kathy Crookston, that I'm making a referral to this utility assistance. And, you know, here's some information they needed to know, how many people live in the household, et cetera. And then that information will be shared off in the referral form as needed to that community-based organization. And they're able to then help facilitate, make sure that they could either accept, waitlist, denied that referral, but why? If they were denying, we need to understand so we could make another referral. If they can accept that referral, that ongoing referral activity will come back to the other side of the platform, so everybody's on the same page and knows exactly what's occurring. All the way down to what we would call outcome details that might have agreed upon, not only the date that service was fulfilled, but maybe let's use SNAP as a example. It may be that they have the application in and then it was accepted. So once they are in the program, that would be deemed a successful outcome. So that one way, again, only information between somebody making the referral, somebody taking the referral, and the level of information that needed to be shared about the person and the person themselves being kind of in the loop, right? Keeping everybody on the same page. Now I'm going to go to what we call.
Can I ask a question? Can you speak a little more specifically to what information is coming back? Is it simply that the referral was made? Are they seeing any treatment information or any services that have, you know, information about services?
Sure, and we can show you we could probably even go right into the platform itself because we do have time. Joe, let me just explain because if you're going to jump into the demo, we can actually show a couple things there. Would that be helpful? Let me at least explain the other.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, because then we can kind of give you an idea of both. And before we even do that, I wanted to give you an idea of how we approach consent, because Joe can show you that as well.
Okay.
So we'll
yeah, because I do have some additional questions in my head, but thinking you might be getting to that part.
Yeah, I think I want to write more questions initially than answers, but just to kind of give you the set of how we think about the two closed loop.
I want to add an overlay to this and just keep it in mind as you answer questions. We're really interested in the consent piece of it. You know, how do you handle consent in all of these processes, and when do you need it? When don't you need it? And how is it dealt with?
We have a few slides specifically on that. Yeah.
Great.
Okay, but I think it's important for you to know the coordinated, because again, you're asking really great questions. How would we handle consent? Because in coordinated, think of this as a coordinated network where they're going to do an intervention, say for home visiting program. And they want to make sure that there's not going to be duplicate actions around a screening, that there's going to be understanding of really maybe if someone has been referred, who they've been referred to, so that there's also maybe not only the screening that could be visible results, but also some document that may be important to have shared. And then what's occurred. And again, that referral activity, you know, has a connection been made, service filled, and then any of that kind of ongoing activity or engagement over time. So we'll show you a little bit about what is actually shared there. But again, this is where we kind of would say you're trying to keep all of these stakeholders on the same page. Now, I say that, yet we will have things around sensitive referral that'll come into play here, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But again, just this is a little bit different, and a level of information might be shared among a variety of different stakeholders of these community-based organizations alongside, say, a payer or provider. Joe, what do we, if we want to now, we may be going a slide or two. I'm not quite sure what you have in order here. Okay. I don't think we talked about having kind of all of these different ones. This is round data.
Yeah, Kathy, let me know what you had in mind.
Joe, if you could go back, that's perfect. So I'm sorry, the intervention one. One slide back. This would just be good to kind of reinforce. Well, there you go. If you look at that apple there, I think a lot of organizations like us, a lot of other vendors in our space are really focusing on those vital resources. I'm going to call them like Maslow's basic needs, right? Food, housing, transportation, employment, et cetera. We are ideal also when somebody's working on research projects. We have a lot underway right now in research projects, I would say, cardiovascular around to me, I can't wait for something like that to be dementia, a variety of other research projects that are all underway. So ideal for that type of research project. The accountable health communities, even as we think about any of those that are underway, how do we kind of support those? And then some of the ones that we talked about right on the left of the apple here are absolutely some of those that we are really seeing. So anything on this maternal child health, again, I know I'm speaking to the choir, but I think there's something like 143 bills in Congress, many of which may never make it to the floor.
Hello?
Kathy, are you there? Yeah.
Hello? Uh-oh. Kathy, we don't hear you if you hear us. Is everybody else still here?
Kathy is on mute.
Oh, this is sorry, I apologize. I got dropped completely. And hoping that doesn't happen again, but it did reconnect. So good thing I'm not using more of my carbon footprint on that, Jennifer. Okay, so now let's go ahead and show the consent options, and also, Joe, we can show that privacy page, and then we can jump right into the demo. So instead of just, we're kind of doing show and tell backwards. The aspect that he showed there of the making sure that we were really focused on, CFR 42 part, being compliant with those is very, very important. So let's go through a little bit of our consent process. Joe, my internet looks to be not very stable. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yes.
we can, I can hear, yeah.
We can hear
Joe?
Yep. Yeah, Kathy, we can hear you. I'm happy to present these two slides.
Okay.
Demo.
Thank you, Joe. Can you go ahead and go through the consent process? Because my internet, I'm going to try to see.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to quickly walk through two slides here and then actually put it into action, just to sort of tie it back to what we talked about, the three different NowPow referral types, the one-way, the closed loop between two organizations, and the closed loop between an entire network. all sort of have a different set of flavors and options. So first, to just take a step back to consent to contact. So we offer a simple opt-in and opt-out text and email contact consent, so in compliance with FCC regulations. And I can show sort of visually where that lives on the patient, client, student, community member profile. And we like to speak flexibly, just given that our customers range throughout healthcare, human services, social services. So actually on the patient or client's profile, we do offer this flag here, letting you know if that person's consent has been captured. For some of our customers, they will choose to enable a hard stop, where if I chose to refer Ernestine without that consent captured and on file, I would be stopped before even sharing that information. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Second is, and we'll see this in action, is the many ways in which signature and consent can be captured. So for some of our customers, they will push out a consent message to the patient or client via text or email. And this is something that I'd be curious to know if perhaps we could even provide like screenshots in the document that you are completing. But if not, more than happy to sort of like write it all in a lot of detail. So in addition to text and email, I, as a care professional, could turn my computer around and have the patient or client complete consent there within the application. I could upload a PDF or another document that has that consent. Maybe it's been captured on paper. So a number of flexible options for actually capturing it. And then regarding revocation and expiration, that is automatically calculated and becomes visible here on that patient or client profile page, which can be revoked at any time per request by the client. And it'll also provide that hard stop for renewal, just to make sure that that has been disclosed. So just want to take a moment to pause and see if there are any questions or things that people would like some more clarity on before we actually add a visual to those different referral types and consent options.
One question I have, and Jennifer, please jump in if things are triggered in your mind as well, is, for instance, I imagine a user needs to be part of the NowPow or the care provider network. So I'm thinking about, how do we take how is the consent used in, for instance, in a school-based system where, people need to consent to, provide their attendance information. Parents need to provide their consent. If, for instance, the school is not part of that network, but, obviously contribute to maybe a probation or maybe child welfare or some other court responses, is that outside of the network, or is that something that is also accessible?
Yeah, so just to make sure I understand the question correctly, if an organization, let's call it School A, is not on any version of the NowPow, is not part of a NowPow network, but they're using the NowPow platform, how would they capture consent? Did I?
Yeah, exactly.
So I find this this visual to be really helpful, and I know we were previously here. So this shared referral, just keep in mind, it is that one-way sharing of one resource or a list of resources. And with multiple versions and tools of our platform, there is both a tool that does not host any patient, person, client information, as well as a version of our tool that does host information about Joe Hinderstein and my address, where I can send that one-way information. So because I'm not actually sending info from Montefiore to Bronx Works, and we're just coming up with random organizations here, and it's just the exchange of information from, let's say, Montefiore to Joe Schmo who lives down the street, the consent capture would be a much different process than if I were sending Joe Schmo's information from Montefiore to Bronx Works and it was available via just those two organizations or for an entire network of organizations. And I'm thinking it might be helpful to use a visual actually within the tool, but is that helpful? Or
No, I don't think that really answers what Daniel was getting at. I think he's saying that, there might be a provider that is on NowPow that's seeking information from a provider that is not on NowPow about an individual
Right.
that is, within the NowPow system, and there is a consent, perhaps that they've already signed FERPA consent, since we're using the tool as an example to obtain attendance data on that individual. And then how does NowPow handle that? Is that outside the system? It wouldn't be able to allow for that, or does NowPow somehow send notice to that school to let them know that this information is being requested through the system, and gives them an option to then provide it somehow or join the system?
okay, so does NowPow offer requests for information from other systems?
Yeah, it's just referrals, essentially, is what this tool is doing.
So,
Yeah, that's a
hi, this is
question.
Kathy. I was dropped about 5 times, so I don't know quite where we are, but I'm calling in from my phone. And Joe, I know you were kind of just showing the one slide when I left on consent. You may have showed some others around information that is shared back and forth. I'm wondering, and you may have it up right now because I have no idea where we are. Again, I'm just calling in from my phone with lack of it trying to log back in. Did you show the actual PDF, the one pager that kind of talks about from light to deep type of consent? And that will give an idea of like how, and as well as kind of the information that is shared. And I think we haven't really showed maybe the information that is shared. Maybe then you can go into the demo to kind of actually show information that was shared. But what was the question? Was it around what information was shared, or what information can additionally be passed along?
So my understanding is that this system is simply housing, well, I don't know. I guess maybe I'm not fully understanding what information is being housed within NowPow, because it does sound that there is some information about conditions, so diagnoses, identified needs, and so there is some PHI being collected and stored. And I'm just wondering, where, I think I'm getting confused as to what level, like, are patient records being transferred through this system? It seems like it's built for referrals. And when you make referrals, often some of that information has to go with a referral. And then if a, does it also allow for the type of sharing, I think that Daniel was positing about, though my feeling is probably not, because that seems to go beyond a referral context, but maybe the consent for that information can be housed within the system. And then if somebody exists outside of NowPow, does it prompt that person to join, or to if we're looking to make referrals, or does the group have to be within the system for it to work?
Okay, well, those were about 5 different questions.
Yeah,
so
sorry, it's all just sort of, I'm
no
really
problem.
just trying to grapple around.
So let me start with one. If and Joe, maybe do you have the one pager that you could show? Looks like I'm logged on. It looks like you have the 3 types of referrals, but this could be wrong.
Yes, it is that one.
Okay. So I'm on-
Can we have that PowerPoint deck, or is that proprietary, or?
You know, I think because that way has a lot of different slides, that this one pager is going to be more beneficial.
Great,
We can always
great.
share
Yeah.
a slide or two that'll be supplementary. But
Right, anything you think
that
would
one,
be
if it's-
helpful for us, we'd love to have.
Exactly. I think what we'll try to do is make sure we're going to share things that are going to be just more related. Some of what I was sharing
Yeah.
initially is to give you context. So
Right.
let me first say, let's go to the ICD-10 codes or Z codes. So the ICD-10, which would be somebody's health condition, you know, somebody has diabetes. We have more than 50 custom condition algorithms by subject matter experts that would identify specific types of resources and services that may be beneficial to somebody with diabetes. So for that, we're not sharing that they have diabetes. It is able to pull in, when we think of this pull and push from a data source that we're integrated, we are able to pull in that ICD-10 code. So by pulling in an ICD-10 code, I can pull in something like diabetes as a code and then automatically generate the personalized referral based on what you know around the person and their health condition. And let's use that same example, and let's just say we're working through Epic, we're pulling in the ICD-10 code, they have diabetes, and I'm a primary care doc, and now I can actually automatically generate this personalized referral that can go right to their after visit summary for them to be able to utilize. Now that would be that shared referral. Can I make any of those closed loops that I believe are going to be more beneficial to make sure that I have an understanding of, did service get fulfilled specifically on this type of referral? Yes, I can go ahead and do that. We'll show you how. But we're not sharing that the person has diabetes with the food pantry, for instance. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Though it might be good to share with the food pantry, given that diabetes has a very significant, I mean, I guess if you had consent, right?
Yeah.
Well,
but
yeah.
when we're talking
I
about
would-
coordinated care, that kind of information might be very helpful to a food pantry to know what kind of food that they should be providing to an individual that meets.
I would say our
Yeah.
customers to date, and I think you're right, and I think we have to, you know, if we think like the Karen Alliance has done all of this work around my data is my data, I decide, and, you know, getting
Mhm.
consent, although we freely all share everything and have Alexis in our home who's probably gathering lots of information on us, or Siri on our phone. But yes, I totally agree. And I think for the most part, I would say our customers do not want to share that actual health condition, say with a food pantry, as opposed to the referrals that would be needed for that person. We've not seen now. If there is something where these identified needs, that it's important to share the identified needs across the coordination, yes. Screenings that have been done, they feel it's important because nothing makes somebody more mad than to, you're going to screen me again, I just did that. You're going
Right.
to ask me some questions that I just answered for someone. That doesn't seem like coordinated care, right? So being able to share and have visibility on a screening that had just been done allows somebody to really help coordinate care, meaning you already have this and it looks like that worked. I might take it further and do this. Now I'm moving the ball forward if we think about really closing needs. So that's really when you think of that coordination. But I
So
want to kind of also,
is all of the information then that is being shared information that the system is obtaining directly from the client? Or is there information being shared from that these providers are gathering independent of the platform, like medical records and things?
yes, there's information that they may be gathering. Let's give an example of maybe a document or something that they know needs to be shared among a coordinated network in order, again, that somebody doesn't have to provide that same document again. So I can upload that right within the platform. I can share it in that coordinated network within the platform. So again, we're trying to reduce any duplicate and not be asking. It's all about breaking down the barriers, but also being sensitive to what information should be shared.
So I have I think you might have hit this and I missed it, but when the patient provides consent, opting in or opting out, and I'm not sure what kind of options you offer. Is it granular? In other words, do they opt into everything? So it's somebody else's decision of which information will in fact be shared with the food pantry or some other system, or do they get the option of saying yes to sharing with this system, no to sharing with that system? How does that break down?
Yeah, and I don't think we did go through that. Can I take one step back on the types of consent first? Then we can talk about the service types, and we can talk about, okay, so the types of consent. Can everybody see the screen? Because now I can, although
Yes,
my internet's not stable, so it may go away from me. But at least we'll send this along to you, because I think this is, if you've not seen it before, I think this could be helpful. So when we're thinking about it, one, I think this is important. At the very top, you want to know that we're HIPAA, FERPA, 42 CFR Part 2 compliant, right? That's important when we think of, use cases with regulated referral senders. The user permissions, who sees information? To us, this is really important. I should see information if I'm working with someone on their care. I'm using care broadly, and I'm going to use care providers broadly. It's not just healthcare, it's all of those that provide care or that might be using that. But somebody else in an organization, not even working with me, should not just see that information. So it should be those user permissions to be in a way that, of course, we're making sure that we are being sensitive to what information is being shared and with who is that information shared. So you can see that last sentence, viewing and conducting screening, closed loop referrals, they're all held to kind of the same role-based access control. Now let's talk about the kind of consent.
I don't think, I guess I'm still not totally clear. Does that mean that the client can actually go in and prevent their information from being seen by a certain organization? That they're consenting to each sharing, or is it a broader consent to share information within a care coordination context?
I just lost the internet, but I know that, if we think of a referral where someone says they don't want that information shared with them, that sensitive kind of referral type can more broadly also be, the information could be masked even on a referral that is not what we would consider a sensitive type of referral.
So who makes the ultimate judgment of who gets to make the judgment whether this set of data gets transferred from this system to that system? Who makes that determination?
I think, from our customers right now, like some of our customers where we have like a statewide behavioral health one in Illinois, for an organization like that where they have a coordinated referral for what they're doing for the behavioral health, and then they have some single track referrals out with some community-based organizations. In Illinois, there's like a legal listing. So the information right within the consent would say who your information would be shared with and the information that would be shared. And that's right within the consent. We can house a consent that the coordinated network decides is the consent that they would want each person to see and agree to. And again, I as a person can revoke that consent as well.
But that would revoke so if you revoke that kind of consent, that would revoke your consent from participation in that entire care coordination
and I believe that's
project.
True for that coordinated network. I believe that is true. So I will, and we can double check on that.
So you couldn't simply say, I don't want my information going to this one organization within this larger care coordination network. That doesn't sound like under that project, that's an option. But is that something that NowPow could support more broadly, more granular consent?
Yeah, and let me just check on, from a perspective of how we would address that. I mean, other than the sensitive referral type.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so it sounds like these
the referral type can even be with any referral, meaning for this I do not want.
And do you have
Let me see
any?
if there's another way.
It sounds like these are set up sort of as networks, and so the networks themselves are standalone, I would say, or there might be another term. And I'm wondering, do you have any instances where networks have connected with each other to make broader networks that allow for?
Yeah, that absolutely. And I call one of the slides that we usually share around that is kind of the amoeba slide. It's like you might have a small network and another small network, and they are intervention based. And of course, they could overlap and they could also grow. And we have a lot of examples of that where it's happened in geographies as they started out kind of a smaller, they grow, they would overlap, and they could become a much larger network.
Okay.
You see the same thing happening in like Milwaukee,
What were the two examples? I'm sorry, Milwaukee and
Milwaukee is another great example. And they're putting some very, very, they're really coming together with all stakeholders to really build this community information exchange. But they do have very specific kind of performance metrics for different types of intervention. Housing different than, say, food. In food, there's emergency food, but then let's get you into a program. So it really builds on each other.
Yeah. And then I also wonder, do you have any of these networks that might be, for example, in a tri-state area where you have people from different jurisdictions, so different states, I think is really what I'm getting at, where you're looking at states that have varying laws around data protection, perhaps.
You bring up a good point, because I think one of your questions was, what's the challenge in this?
The challenge, there's lots of challenges,
Exactly. So you just identified one where Illinois has certain types of challenges where when building a network there and working with our customer there were specific things that they needed to do to satisfy and think about from the privacy response, but within their actual consent around this is different. How customers think about it is different. And I mean that because right now, some of these laws, unfortunately, even around texting or emailing or how you think about treatment. I mean, and this was something we dealt with in my previous company as well, haven't been updated since like 1990. We're in 2021. And so I think there's a lot of how do you interpret some of these laws?
Well, yeah, and I think that some of it is saying, well, how has the court interpreted this law? Because, there are laws from the 70s that are governing the internet today, and how we work through these issues of can we text people to get information and how do they consent and all of these things. And so it's not just looking necessarily at laws, but also the legal interpretation of the law and the guidance from regulatory agencies and other things.
So we have our own legal representation that would be subject matter experts in these fields that we ask to guide us for kind of, how should we be looking at this? But very importantly, they then work with our customers who may or may not see it quite the same way. And we're going to follow, what does the customer see? Of course, we're going to give kind of our guidance and as our subject matter experts and how we built the tool and how we built in the consent functionality from. And as you saw, I'm unfortunately not on the internet right now, but as you saw there, the very, very light where you're signing kind of a treatment or such, where, from a HIPAA compliant, from clinical to clinical providers, but yet from clinical to non-clinical, you don't have the same HIPAA regulations. You may have different ones, but not the same. And so how they would interpret that. But in many cases, if they have a consent they're already obtaining in this external system, they may not use our full consent functionality. If they are getting verbal consent, you can see there's like this checkbox feature that they're able to use, that I've gotten consent. And I think it might be important, Joe, if not already, just to log in the interest of time, to kind of show what that looks like. And then I think it's important for you to be able to see like what information is shared. Then,
so I want to interrupt for a second just to point to the clock and be respectful of people's time. I don't know if people have to jump off, if you have more time to provide. One thing that I will ask of you, since you have all of our questions, and some of them are appropriate for you and some are not, and some you've addressed and some have not, if you have the bandwidth to give short answers to each of those and send it to us, that would be great. It would circumvent our needing to come back again and again. But if you can't do that, that's fine. As we go through the process, I'll get back to you with anything I don't feel like we have. But the first thing is, how much time do people have?
I have 15
see
more
that we're
minutes.
actually over right now.
But yeah,
I figured.
I have a hard stop at 10:30, but I want to be respectful of everybody else too.
Yeah. So now Powers, what do you say? Do we need to wrap up?
We didn't jump into the platform, which unless because I really apologize for the internet snafu. I have no idea what's going on, but I think we'll send along this privacy and security. We can think about a couple of screenshots or something that may be important or helpful.
Sure.
Yeah, that would be great.
I can work with Leslie. Leslie and I, is anybody on this call going to HIMSS or?
I am going to be at HIMSS. Are you going to be at HIMSS?
And who was that speaking?
Oh, sorry, this is Jennifer Bernstein. I'm going to be leaving on Sunday to head to HIMSS.
Okay, so I will be Leslie, who would be one of those subject matter experts on everything privacy consent. Her team builds all of that functionality, is involved with our legal representation on every single call. So she and I will be there. She's actually arriving Tuesday. I'm arriving Monday morning, but she'll be there with me. She's leaving, I think, Friday afternoon. I have to leave that morning to go down to Scottsdale. So we can definitely find time, Jennifer. That might be
that would be great to connect, especially speaking with someone from the legal side.
Well, she's our product lead.
Okay.
And I guess with our legal representation. She's also meets with when we have legal representation from our customers. So how each of our HIEs actually think about this differently. And again, some of that is maybe based on the fact of their legal, how they are interpreting, as well as the states that they're in. But we can kind of talk about, each aspect of that, and we can give you some maybe concrete examples of how they're being addressed in some of these different markets as well. To them, I think the important thing was that we have this functionality to be able to do this from a very light to a very deep, and that we can put in place some of these hard stops, but additionally, the sensitive service types for those referrals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it would be great then to connect. I'll be pretty open with my availability at HIMSS, except for when I'm presenting on Thursday. So, but the other days I'm pretty open.
Can I ask? Hi, this is Daniel. Can I ask one quick technical question? And Kathy, I don't know if you're Kathy Miller, if you're still on, Orion, which is the connectivity to like state systems. And I don't know if you guys have gotten into that, or the HIEs for that matter, within the Bronx. Are the consent functionality within NowPow sort of addressing any of the issues, Kathy, that you've expressed in the past around you've got the data and now you need the consent? Is there an overlap there, or am I just conflating those things?
I think there's compatibility there. We've been talking about interfacing with Being New York between us and NowPow, but we really haven't gotten started on actually discussing how it would work and whose consent applies where.
Okay, so it's early on.
But I think technically, it's a question of just building the rules that we decide on, which I think is part of the point that Kathy's been making about their clients, which is just, they've got the engine that can have the rules input. And it's really the client network and its legal context from wherever it is and whatever domains it's operating in that govern which rules do you actually apply as you select the network for that particular client of theirs.
That's interesting. I think that would probably be an area, a valuable area for investigation or discussion, post this call in terms of what that does look like for systems that are, trying to interface and use those engines already. That may be really productive, especially as we think about, the ink sites in particular.
Okay, so I think we're going to wrap up. Is that I want to be clear. And when we do, if the stewards folks could stay on the phone for stay on the line for a few minutes, that would be great. Okay, I think we're wrapping up. I'm going to assume so. Thank you immensely, Kathy and Joe, for this time you've given us and insights you've given us. Again, if you have the bandwidth to answer some of those questions, the key questions that we didn't get to that you think are important for us to know, we'd love that. And certainly we welcome and invite, excuse me, your input with screenshots, content, whatever you want, in the working document that in our SharePoint site that Amanda gave you access to. That would be great.
So I just wanted to add before we jump off, I put my email address in the chat. I know that Kathy, you can't see it, but perhaps Joe can. And I think we're all on the invite as well, but I just want you to have my contact so that we can coordinate getting in touch at HIMSS.
That sounds great. The other thing I know you were all on the ONC, or most of you, it sounds like. I'll make sure I still share along those slides that Leslie and Mike had actually presented, because it is around, really kind of our approach around what we do from a privacy consent perspective. So we can immediately share that one pager, and the ONC, I'll ask Leslie if to hand that off, and I'll share that, because I do think it kind of goes through those aspects that might be important for you to see.
Great. And to be clear, before we publish anything, you'll get a chance to see it. So you'll be able to make sure that the points that you think are most important are in there.
Yeah, that'd be great. That would be great. And I'm sure they'll want to. Thanks, Amanda, for sharing the link. I'm sure they'll want to be able to look in and comment, and we can put together some good information for you. So again, apologize, I couldn't even see half of what maybe even Joe was sharing. And I would say at some point it might be nice. We did a lot of telling and not showing. It would have maybe been easier to jump into the platform earlier so that you could actually just see it. And then you see what information is shared on the referrals across a coordinated network or a tracked referral.
Is that on the NowPow website? Is there a sort of a video demo? No, okay.
No, we don't really, The video we have there is more of an animated video, so it's not really every bit of our functionality, to be honest.
Sure.
But we would share it on a demo with you for sure.
Okay, so maybe we would set that up.
I think sometimes it's just easier, because some of the questions were, well, what information is shared? And the other one we didn't do, and Kathy has seen this, but I can share that with Jennifer. We can share that when we get together. The other thing we can share is like the data exchange, that interoperability that you were asking about. as far as just normal integrations that we think of, I'm not talking about interoperability with other referral platforms in this, but more the interoperability with the data sources like an HIE, a EHR, a case management system, a CRM. We've got a rep with all of them. So we can share that too.
That sounds great. That would be very helpful.
And I thought we wouldn't use all the time and we went over time. So everybody have a Friday. I definitely, Jennifer, for sure we'll get together. That would probably, I think, be really, really helpful. And Leslie and I will have time.
Thank you. Sounds great.
Great. Great. All right. Thank you very, very much. Have a good weekend, one and all.
Yes, absolutely.
Same.
Bye all.